whatever, yeah. But even if it's KP1 or 2, we're getting great displays.
I bet. How do you get to Churchill? Isn't it kind of hard to get to this time of year? Or do you have to take a
Well, no
train or
harder than any other time of the year, other than weather delays, which can happen anywhere you're traveling in the north.
yeah.
There's two ways. You can take the train via rail from Winnipeg, 2-day trip, or fly Comair from Winnipeg. It's 2-hour flight.
Oh. Do you fly up usually?
Yeah, always. Yeah, I never
Yeah.
take the train.
Yeah.
No.
I'd want to take the train. I love trains.
I took the train out of Anchorage up to Fairbanks one March in the winter, and it really was an experience. It actually, the engine got a flat tire, and they had to stop one of the engines and pull it off. And then we hit blizzard conditions, and the heat went out of the train. Maintenance had to come down the track to meet us to fix the heater or whatever it was. There was no heat at all in the train. And we sat out there in this just blizzard conditions. And it was amazing just to watch it. It didn't really affect the train that much, but it was something else.
Well, that could be your Churchill train experience as well, from what I understand. It's
Yeah.
just last year there was a train arrived and it had mechanical problems, so it couldn't leave until the next train came up with the spare parts to fix it. So there are two trains in town for a couple of days.
Yep. Yeah. 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 I don't know how they got a flat spot on one of the wheels, but they had to pull we had two engines and they had to pull one off. Yeah, it was an experience, but it was pretty cool just sitting at the window watching the world go by.
Yeah.
Yeah, must have been unforgettable.
It was. I really did enjoy it. It took 12 hours. It took every bit because of the problems we had. It took 12 hours to do it, and they were picking up off-gridders along the way. So,
You did tell Alan that his presentation has to be in Latin, right?
I want to understand it. We better keep it in English.
How are we doing on time? Can I test my screen sharing just to make sure
Sure.
it's
Hey,
working?
sure, that was
Yes.
that's
All
9 minutes.
right. Desktop one. Now, I'm never quite certain which I need to share. Share.
Oh,
Oh,
Are you
nice.
are you seeing the title
oh, I'm
slide?
seeing it. It's beautiful, Alan.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Okay, all right. That's good. All
Perfect.
right. Just
And I
just
hear
wanted to make
you.
sure. I always get confused with Zoom in terms of sharing what you share, and
Yeah.
I'm
I do
actually
that.
disconnected from my secondary screen just to make sure there's no confusion about what screen I'm actually sharing.
Yeah. Okay, and
When,
Carol is joining us.
yeah, Carol's back there somewhere. Yeah, I get confused when they do Microsoft Teams I'm so used to Zoom. When I get on something else, I get lost. I mean, I'm so
Oh,
used to being here. It
yeah.
just, yeah,
Yeah, and just when you get used to Zoom, they go and change it or you're on you or something or other. But
yeah. Like everything else.
what would we do without it now? Three, four
Oh,
years ago, we didn't have this at all,
I know.
and now
And
we depend upon it.
that is the one thing I think is good that came out of COVID. We all
Yeah,
learned we could
yeah,
reach out a lot farther,
yeah.
and it's amazing. I mean, we would never be able to listen to you. I mean, to bring you here, and this is
Oh
just
my God,
amazing.
what a what a what a disadvantage of COVID. You get to listen to me.
No, we think that's a good advantage. No,
I
it
bet.
is. It definitely
But
is.
we couldn't do all these kind of programs, and like Richard
Right.
and Kalamazoo, they couldn't do that kind of
Oh, yeah.
extensive outreach and bringing in speakers. Well, last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, they were trying to bring in physically Jay Anderson from Winnipeg. Well, the weather was so bad everywhere, they forget it. They couldn't do it, and so he just zoomed in, and they did the talk anyway, and it
Yeah.
was fine.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, the people that we've had speaking at Alcons when we had our Alcon virtual, just when we do this monthly program, my gosh, it's been amazing. And finally, I got to meet you up at Aurora Summit.
Yeah.
So, I've seen you online, spoke with you online, but now I, could actually sit down and talk to you. So it was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was neat. Actually, it is still nice to meet people face to
It
face.
is.
It
It
is.
definitely is. Yep.
Starting to get cold outside.
How cold is it?
It's so cold.
It's so cold.
There was something about a well digger that I remember, but
Oh,
I won't talk about it on
you can't take him anywhere.
Astronomical League Live. That's right.
Uh, yeah, it's like 48 degrees still here, so that's not bad at all.
Uh-huh.
Put my Eclipse hat on.
There you go.
We
Okay.
had 48 degrees once, and they had to close down the entire state.
So, Alan, I've been watching these TikTok videos, and it shows people pouring what looks like boiling water out into the air, onto the ground. And one of them was they just made like this long spike that came up. And then this other one would look like a loop, like a spiral that froze as you're pouring it. Is this a real effect?
I can't say about what those are. I don't know if it's boiling water. I thought what people seem to do when it's like minus 30, minus 40
Yeah.
is it detergent in water or something? I forget what the
Hmm.
concoction is that will freeze and crystallize very quickly. Is People make these bubbles and
Yeah, no,
Right.
these were like sculptures that they were
oh,
making out of.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I saw what you're talking about, where she took like water and just made a circle, and
Yeah.
yeah, that was really cool. I have seen them do
Is
that
it,
in Alaska when it was
is
freezing
that real? I
cold.
mean, that can be done.
At whatever they did froze at least somewhat. So, and I've heard them say they can leave a banana out there and drive a nail through it when it's frozen. Um, I've heard all kinds of things.
Well,
Hello,
it's
Heard
not
John.
all
quite
kinds
as
of
cold
things
as liquid
too.
nitrogen in the winter here, so
Yeah.
just
I mean, it looked spectacular, but I was like, how is this thing supporting itself? It was like a circle, like a spiral, like you were pouring water around a circumference like of a barrel or something, and it was just suspended in the air by its own strength, you know,
okay.
Saw a
No, I'm
girl.
its
not
I
own
mean,
looking at it.
icy frozen strength.
I saw a video of a girl that took a pan of hot water and she had the sun. Her body was behind, so there's backlight on her, and she just flung the water out of the pan and it just evaporated right above her head. Now I don't know anymore.
Huh.
You can see anything, can be anything. You don't know what to believe because they do
Oh
such a
yeah,
good
everything
job.
can be deep
Yeah,
faked these days.
yeah, yeah.
Well, you can certainly, we've done this in Churchill when it's minus 40, where you take hot water and you just throw it into the air and it just freezes and crystallizes instantly and in a shower of particles. And you have the
Yeah,
sun backlit. It's a beautiful
Oh,
effect.
that's
it
cool.
And
is.
we did that and we shot a video and put that online and it goes viral immediately, something
Hi,
like that.
Carol.
Yeah.
Good
Yep.
evening, everybody.
So we got John
Good
Goss
evening.
and
Hi,
Carol
Carol.
Orge.
The gang's
Yeah,
all
Alan
here.
Dyer, Terry
Good
Mann,
evening.
David
Yeah.
Levy, and it is we're
We got
about 3 minutes
3
away from the
minutes.
top of the hour,
Yeah.
and we will get started. This image that you're seeing, Alan, this is the. Can you see it?
Yes.
You can.
Mhm.
Yep. So, can you tell us a little bit about this image of your eclipse image?
You're using a background? Well, I see this got to be the 2017 eclipse. So it's the center image must be a composite, which I'm going to talk about,
Yeah.
flanking by the two diamond rings either side. And I'll talk briefly about, how you do that. But you got to take the pictures first, and so
Right.
That's the thing with an eclipse. There's so many ways to shoot it. And tonight I am concentrating on the close-up shots through telescopes for shots like this to get a set of images that you can then layer and make a composite like this.
Great.
What I like about this image and images similar to this is that you can see markings on the moon. I guess that's due to the full
Yeah,
Earth
the Earth
shine.
shine. I'll talk about that. It's just
Yeah.
barely visible on this
Barely,
image, but there's ways
barely.
of bringing that out if you go for a long exposure. And there's, that's a little demanding to do that, but I'll talk about that. Yeah, you can see the Earth shine, on the moon. So it's the only time, you get the new moon and totally lit by just nothing but Earth shine.
Yeah, I see it always has the same face towards us, even during new moon.
Yep.
Yeah, Carol and John, have you met Alan? Have you?
Yes,
Not in
we've been on
person.
with other broadcasts. In
Yeah.
fact, he was on with ASKC not too long ago, maybe 2 months ago, something like that. Yeah,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
always good to see you again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've done a couple of webcasts for AL,
Yep.
maybe 2 years ago now. Forget.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So John,
Well done.
John Goss is our media officer. He does all of the announcement for your speaking. Yes, he's the one that he does fantastic announcements. And he always
Anything
comes
else we
through.
need done, he's a real
He is.
rock for us.
Yes, definitely. Yep.
Okay. I hear a little bit of background sound, not right at the moment, but I was hearing it. So if you think you have some background sound, just mute till it's your turn. And we've got somebody here. Oh, somebody wants to sell us something. We're going to block you. I'm sorry. Go sell on somebody else's live program, okay? So there you go. Although maybe just for fun, I could bring a bunch of insurance salesmen on or something like that
No.
to do live chat.
No.
Just a special guest or something to talk about some sort of mutual of whatever,
As
Wild
long as
Kingdom.
the cut is good.
Yeah. Well, guys, we are going to get started. I have a little feature from your friends at NASA. So here we go.
Did you know that you can participate in solar eclipse science with NASA? NASA's citizen science projects are collaborations between scientists and members of the public, no matter your citizenship. Several volunteer science projects are gearing up for the 2024 total solar eclipse that you can join. Total solar eclipses don't just look cool, they provide a rare chance to see the sun's faint outer atmosphere. Using telescopes and cameras that are safe for viewing the sun, volunteer scientists across North America will capture images of the total solar eclipse. Scientists will study these images in detail, tracking how plumes of solar material move through the sun's atmosphere. But be careful, without proper tools and techniques, you can damage your eyes and your camera. Did you know you can listen to an eclipse too? Amateur or ham radio operators will send radio messages to one another during the eclipse to see how changes in the upper atmosphere distort radio signals. As the moon blocks one portion of the sun, it can make other portions easier to see. Working with local scientists at an observatory in Southern California, participants will observe magnetic hotspots on the sun as the moon passes over them, revealing details they normally can't detect. Want to learn more? Follow Do NASA Science on X and Facebook to see how you can get involved in NASA citizen science.
Well, everyone, this is Scott Roberts from Explore Scientific and the Explore Alliance, and we're proud to be the broadcaster for the Astronomical League Live program. This is their 34th program, and I'm going to turn this over to Terry Mann. Terry, thanks for coming on and hosting
Thanks.
yet another one of these.
Well, thank you for broadcasting it, Scott. We definitely appreciate all of your help and all of your support. So I hope everybody's doing okay out there and gotten through all the snow and the cold weather and probably still under clouds. But we're all back again and hopefully warming up. So we've got a really exciting program tonight, I think. We have David Levy with us, and we always enjoy David, and Carroll Iorg, president of the Astronomical League, and John Goss, which is our media officer. But we're really excited to have Alan Dyer here tonight. He is like one of the Eclipse masters and one of the Aurora masters. I'm always so impressed with his work. So we're so glad to have him tonight. So without further ado, how about if we go to David and let him start us off for tonight? David, how about you?
Thank you
read-
so much, Terry. And
Thank you.
it's good to be here, and it's really good to be here, especially with Alan, who has been a very good friend of mine for many decades. I have to say, in anticipation of this fascinating presentation I'm about to hear, is that I am not an astrophotographer. I'll take a picture of the eclipse next couple of months, but I am primarily a visual observer. And that much said, I have taken hundreds of thousands of pictures of the night sky, mostly when I was observing with Gene and Carolyn. And that was 30 years ago when we had our Magnum event that took place 30 years ago with the collision of a comet with Jupiter. For my quotation today, I'm going all the way to Charlotte Bronte's book, Jane Eyre. And if you don't, it's been, Wendy and I had a little tradition that once a year, when the day would dawn gray and rainy, we would just spend the day watching the BBC production of Jane Eyre. I didn't do that last year, so this year I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that I watched it a second time the following day. Unfortunately, we had the cloudy, damp, and dismal weather to support it. But here is the quotation that I'm going to read to you. And she has just had her first meeting with Rochester, and where Rochester accuses her of spooking, of bewitching his horse. Oh, we had so much fun teasing her about that. And she's about to go back into Thornfield. I lingered at the gates. I lingered on the lawn. I paced backwards and forwards on the pavement. The shutters of the glass door were closed. I could not see into the interior, and both my eyes and spirit seemed drawn from the gloomy house, from the gray hollow filled with rayless cells, as it appeared to me, to that sky expanded before me, a blue sea absolved from taint of cloud, the moon ascending it in solemn march, her orb seeming to look up as she left the hilltops, from behind which she had come, far and farther below her, and aspired to the zenith, midnight dark in its fathomless depth and measureless distance. And for those trembling stars that followed her course, they made my heart tremble, my veins glow when I viewed them. Little things recall us to earth. The clock struck in the hall, that sufficed. I turned from the moon and the stars, opened a side door, and went in. Thank you very much, and Terry, back to you.
Thank you, David. We appreciate you being here. And I think you have been at every one of our programs, and we really appreciate that. I know it takes some effort to do it, so thank you very much.
It's so much fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. All right. How about next if we go to Carroll Iorg? The Carroll is the president of the Astronomical League. Carroll, what's going on with the league?
Well, lots of stuff, and I'm excited that we are still we're almost out of the deep freeze here in the Midwest, and hopefully better days are ahead for us. The major thing we have coming up in Kansas City, where I'm based, is Alcon 2024, and that will be in July. And I'd like to share my screen, Terry. Hang on, we're just almost there.
Yeah, I can see the building.
Okay, let's go back one. Here we go.
There you
Okay,
go.
that's where we're going to be is on July 17th through the 20th, 2024. And Overland Park, Kansas is a suburb of Kansas City. It's just on state line. We're a big metropolitan area here, but it's almost like it's two different countries between Missouri and Kansas. There's even a road between the two that says State Line Road, and so it's just like night and day. We have people in Kansas trying to pull our royals away and our chiefs away occasionally. So we have some friendly competition that goes on in the area. Anyway, it's going to be a fun time. It'll be held at the Doubletree by Hilton in Overland Park. We have an exciting lineup of speakers who are going to be there, and I'll get into that just a second here. One of the things that's different about this particular convention is we are going to be live streaming the event for those who aren't able to be there for one reason or another. So stay tuned on that. We have a tremendous amount of great speakers, and now I'll say more about that in just a second. Union Station is one of our main meeting points in Kansas City. It also has a planetarium, Gottlieb Planetarium, which will be the site of our meeting at the planetarium, and are having a show that night, first night of the convention in Kansas City. And the speaker right before me is going to be there as well. Anybody know that guy in the middle there? He's is well known at Linda Hall Library, which is where we will be on the second night of the convention. Linda Hall Library has the depository for David's very first telescope, as well as his observing logs through all of his Comet activities. And it's going to be a real thrill. We've had lots of good comments, and always do when we talk about Linda Hall, because that's such a great place. What would be Kansas City without barbecue? We think we do a fairly decent job of making barbecue, although some cities disagree when we get into the Super Bowl and so on, and they're having contests. So they like to rib us a little bit on that. But we will be meeting at the local Arboretum, which is about 5 miles away from Kansas City. It's very close, and that's where we'll have the Starbecue, as we call our barbecues, on Friday night. Powell Observatory, the Astronomical Society of Kansas City, has had this as their primary location for over 30 years. And we will be having a trip down there after our Starbecue at the Arboretum. And we will have a speaker or two there. And also we'll have a brief introduction to the observatory. One of our visitors, one of our speakers, will be Star Trek actor Tim Russ. He's a very varied person. In addition to being a Trekkie, he's also an amateur astronomer, musician, and writer. And we anticipate having at the banquet a jazz band reflecting the heritage of Kansas City, one of our heritages. And he's if his schedule works out, he's going to be playing in the jazz band that's going to be there as well. So that should be fun. And that's it for now. Terry, back to you.
That sounds so exciting. I'm confused, Carol. Isn't Kansas City, Missouri, that the club is from? Is it from Kansas?
Kansas City, Missouri.
There you go. Okay.
It just so happened that we had to sneak across state lines
You
just a
went
few
over
blocks
the
in order to
line.
set up our convention.
Okay. Yeah, I thought for sure we were in Kansas City, Missouri, and when I saw Kansas, I thought, oh boy, I'm gonna have to think
And
about
we
this a
get-
little more.
We get a ton of confusion about that. Often people come in and says, "Are we in Kansas? Is that we go to Kansas?" They forget about the word city and they say Kansas. So But we
Ah,
told them as long as they spend money in the hotels and the in the
yeah.
restaurants, we don't care.
Oh, all right. Well, now I know I'll be in Kansas in Overland Park. Okay. That sounds great. I look forward to it. And I'm sure a lot of other people do too. That sounds like a lot of fun.
We anticipate having registration available in the next couple of weeks. We're putting the final touches on that right now. So
Okay.
stay
Well,
tuned.
yeah, it's really nice because it's in the middle, kind of in the middle of the US. It makes it a little bit easier for people to come in from all directions. Like, I know I'm going to drive out just so I can take my time and, just enjoy the drive. I think it's like an 8-hour drive for me, so that's not too bad.
I know we've got two Canadians on here, but I know of one other Canadian that is going to be there.
Yeah.
One of our award winners at Alcon 2023 from Canada. He says, I'm going to go to special effort to be there. So I think we're going to have one Canadian besides David there. And of course, if
Sounds,
Alan would like to come on down, that would be great as well.
yes, we definitely. Yes, definitely. All right. Thank you very much, Carol. Appreciate the update on Alcon. And so from there, if we go to John Goss, not only is he the media officer for the Astronomical League, but he's also a lunatic, the master of the moon lunatic type person. Yeah, see, I brought it back again, John. You'll never live it down. He has done so many talks on the moon for the league, for the astronomical uh, live show, Astronomical League Live, that I
Yeah.
called him the master of lunacy. So he'll never live it down. You might as well get used to it.
Well,
Tidily wears proud.
there's something I'm not going to really talk about here, but I will say that Terry asked me a lunar question yesterday, and I dug up some information that I didn't know before. So thank you, Terry. You
No,
helped me
no.
as well.
Well, no problem. You helped me too. So I always wondered
Well,
about that.
it just shows you that we've been in the hobby for a long time, and yet we still run across stuff we don't
Right.
know. We've never heard about, and yet
Yeah.
evidently it's not a secret. So I learned something.
Right.
So thank you.
That's one of
But
the cool things about astronomy. We always have new stuff. We learn new things. It's
you
never
betcha.
stale. It's always something new and challenging a lot of times. So thank you, John. I appreciate that.
No. Tonight, I won't talk for too long, but I'd like to say a few words about a subject a lot of people, a lot of clubs don't like talking about. And because it's something that's it's crucial for club operations. So let me start my presentation. Make sure I get this thing going right. Essentially, it's volunteerism. Most clubs, well, I would say all clubs are run exclusively by volunteers. And sometimes it's hard to find new volunteers. This is part of a much larger talk, and I start out by talking about my hometown. Fincastle, Virginia. It's a small town. It has roughly 400 people. I'll make this briefer than I normally would. It has about 400 people. And a number of years ago, the people who run the town called a big meeting saying, hey, we have been doing this with the same people for many, many years. We need new people to step up to be the mayor, the vice mayor, the council members and all the other officials in town. So, we please step forward. And I thought at the time, they sound like a large astronomy club. There are clubs across the country which have problems getting new volunteers, new officers, new people to step up and do things, not necessarily officers, but people who do the nuts and bolts of what the club is supposed to do. They have a hard time doing that. So I want to talk a little bit about it. And I think one of the reasons and one of the problems is that we've heard this adage many, many, many times: never volunteer for anything. And I believe this really came out of the military, in which if you volunteer for something, you would probably be given a pretty onerous task that nobody wants to do. And so it kind of stuck with people: never volunteer for anything, and then there won't be any problems. But really, is that how hobby clubs work? Do hobby clubs give people who volunteer onerous tasks that take too much time to do? No, that cannot be that way, because a hobby club like an astronomy club or a larger organization like the Astronomical League would soon come to a halt because no one would want to do all that stuff. So that model just clearly that does not fit amateur astronomy. And you always got to remember that nothing ever gets done without volunteers. So they are crucial for the club to have. So it's essential for the club to treat their volunteers nicely, correctly, respectfully, to make sure they keep signing up to do the tasks that need to be done. But, never volunteer for anything. Okay, scratch that one off. But there are other reasons why people don't volunteer, and I think they're pretty valid because it's all personal stuff, and you can imagine what they would be. You could be intimidated just by the fact that if you're a fairly new person in the club or the hobby and you don't know all that much, well, you think, I can't volunteer for this because I just don't have what it takes. Okay, well, that makes sense. But the organization should be set up to help people in that fashion, to provide them guidance into becoming more active club members, perhaps giving them smaller, easier jobs to do, volunteer roles to fulfill, such as, let's say, you can organize an outreach event, gather people together, set something up and take care of that. That's a small thing to do, but it has to be done. And if nobody does it, it's not going to get done. Another reason would be you just don't have enough time to do the job or do it well. That's understandable. We all have busy lives, but I think the truth is that most of us do have an hour or so every week or two to devote to helping out an organization such as your local astronomy club. So, don't toss that out immediately. I think it also comes to stand to reason that clubs, that some people, they don't want to be an officer. Hey, I'm not in the club to do this. I just want to see the programs. I just want to go to the events, that type stuff. Okay. Not everyone has the temperament to be an officer. I understand that. And but I think most people could. They can maybe not be an officer, but they can certainly volunteer to do some of the tasks that need to be done. One kind of embarrassing thing is you don't want to go through the election process. You don't want to put your name out there and then find out that you lost the election to somebody else. It's kind of, you don't want to have hard feelings and all that. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And this is tough. But all I can say is that the club has to be prepared to keep welcoming these people and giving them comfort that even if they don't win the election, they are still needed, and there's always next time. This is one, which I think is a big one that we don't like talking about. It has to do with my small town here. It's that yes does not mean forever. You raise your hand. Yeah, I'll run for office. I'll be a secretary or some other position. But that's just for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, maybe, not for 10 years. And some people see officers in the club that have been fulfilling those roles for a long time. And they're going to get turned off for that. I understand this one. So let's talk a little bit about why people have been officers. What got them started? When I mean officers, not just officers, but just volunteers. They don't have to be an officer, but volunteers to help the club out in some way, one way or other. And I will say all these I'm going to list apply to me. And I bet you they apply to a lot of other people too. They enjoy working with other people, or the officers or the members. They like organizing stuff. They like talking to the people, seeing what they want, laughing and having a good time with them. They like getting people together. That's understandable, at least for me, because that applies to me. And learning something new. As I was just saying, talking to Terry before we all began here, we learned something new about the moon this week. I've been doing this for many years, and there's always something coming up that I don't know. And it's fun to find this stuff out. And I have seen people come into a role as being a volunteer and doing a fine job at it, and it really builds their confidence. They're not so, I shouldn't use the word shy, because I used to call myself a shy person. Well, maybe I am, but in many cases I should be more shy than I am. But anyway, it builds your confidence in astronomy and in life in general and getting things done. And I personally like being part of something greater. I was a volunteer for our club for a number of years, and then I got interested in the Astronomical League and getting bigger and bigger across the country, meeting new people, finding new stuff, learning about more stuff across the country. And I really like that. So I like bringing astronomy to my area, to my club, to the public. I find that to be a lot of fun. And it gives you a deep sense of satisfaction there. Another reason why officers do it, or why people do become officers, or they just volunteer in general, in a way might be the biggest reason of all. So pay attention. Positively influencing a young person's life. I think all you officers out there who are listening to this, I bet you each one of you have influenced a young person's life. That somebody has come up to you later on and said, thank you for doing that. Thank you for showing me whatever is in the telescope. Thank you for talking about this particular subject in astronomy or the universe or whatever. I really enjoyed that, and it really got me thinking, and it really affected me. When I hear stuff like that, that has happened to me. I feel pretty good about it, and it helps me understand why people should become actively involved in their astronomy club or whatever hobby organization that you're involved with. Okay, let's kind of flip the coin here, see what the other side says. So you want to volunteer. Well, what type of traits are we really looking for? Maybe not everyone's suitable for this stuff. Let's look at these. There are three traits you should have. You got to have the ability to do whatever has to be done. I mean, that's pretty obvious. You got to have the time. Some of us are overworked, as I was saying a little earlier, but you got to have the time to do it. And you got to have the desire. You really want to do it. And if you don't have one of those three or two of those three or whatever, something's not going to gel right. Something that's just not going to flow. So if you have those three things, and there really is a fourth, which I don't like talking about, but people should be a team player. You got to be able to work well with others. That's part of the fun behind it, I think. So think about that. So you think you need someone to volunteer for something, and you got somebody in mind, or maybe you don't have one in mind. How do you build a pool of possible candidates? Well, one thing I do is always keep in people's minds that there's always a need for volunteers. That maybe they shouldn't do it right now, but next year at this time, maybe that would be a good thing for them to do, volunteer for whatever position is open. And another thing to do, which I think is really critical and a lot of clubs miss out, is that you got to have smaller tasks for people to accomplish. So they build up their confidence and they build up their knowledge of the club. As I mentioned earlier about maybe getting an outreach director. Typical example I use is maybe have a club photographer. Doing stuff like this, you meet more people in the club, you feel more comfortable being in it and helping manage it, direct it. But really the bottom line is, this is the one that's it's tough, but it isn't so tough. I'll explain that in a moment. But the most important and most effective way of persuading someone to volunteer is ask. A lot of people, they don't want to step forward. They feel uncomfortable. They think, oh, I think I'd like to do it, but I don't know if I can. And I don't know if I should do all this. And then you come up and say, hey, would you like to step forward for this position? We need help here. And from what I've seen, you can do it. I'll say most of the time, 80% of the time, someone's going to say yes. Sure, I'll do it. And that gets them going on the road to fulfilling your need for a club leadership. So starting small, working their way up, but you got to ask. So many people, they aren't going to volunteer. Some people will, but no, ask. and it'll work. It'll work. On that happy note, I want to just conclude things by saying, volunteerism is fun. If you have those three traits, as I was talking about, the ability to do the task, the time to do the task, and the desire to do it, you're undoubtedly going to do well at it. And it's going to benefit the club as well as yourself, as you're going to benefit your community. And it's a good thing. So, we're in January now. Many clubs, organizations have upcoming elections in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months. Give it a thought, give it an honest thought, because clubs need your help. They need someone to step forward and fill those offices and do the tasks that need to be done. Thank you, Terry, for giving me this X amount of time to do all this. But you can see this is an important thing, and it's something true to my heart that I want clubs to succeed, and this is one way of doing it. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. That's so much of what you said is absolutely true. I think a lot of us got into astronomy because we loved astronomy. If we did not really enjoy this hobby, I wouldn't put as much time in it as what I do. And I don't think any of us would, but we enjoy the people. I mean, there is an astronomical community, and it is, you go to the conferences and you meet the same people over and over, and you become kind of family, extended family, where you keep in touch. Maybe you've got the same astrophotography or visual, or you're interested in whatever
Certainly.
part. You share that and you build on that and you learn. Just like we were talking about the question I asked, yeah, we've been here quite a while, but yet there is always something to learn. And it's just like listening to Alan and some of these really good speakers. I learned so much. You come away from that excited because you've got new ideas, new things to try. And it's exciting, and that's a great thing about astronomy, no matter what you do with it.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like about it is the people, but not just people around me, but all around the country and really international. As you were just saying, we're going to be listening to Alan here in a few minutes. We heard something from David. We see Scott. We see all these people every week, every 2 weeks or whatever, from all over. And you think, gosh, 30 years ago, that certainly wouldn't have been.
That would not have been possible. That's
No,
right.
Yeah.
no.
There's we also have live chat going on right now, and someone asked if that slideshow that you put on, John, could be made available for download. And I was suggesting maybe it could be posted on the league's Facebook page or the website, but people want it.
Well, certainly, they're certainly not copyrighted or anything like that. But yeah, I can make them available.
That'd be great. Thank you, John. That's great.
Welcome. You're welcome.
All right. Well, up next is Alan Dyer. And welcome back, Alan. It has been such a pleasure to have you on. I enjoy everything you speak about. He's not only an eclipse chaser, oh my gosh, he's a master photographer at Aurora. So many things. He is so full of knowledge. It's amazing. And tonight he's going to speak to us about photographing the 2024 solar eclipse. So Alan is well known as an astronomy author and astrophotographer. With Terrence Dickinson, he co-wrote the popular book, The Backyard Astronomer's Guide, and contributed new content to the new edition of Night Watch. He serves as He serves also as an editor or contributing editor to Sky and Telescope magazine, and authored the new ebook, How to Photograph the Solar Eclipses. He has traveled the world to chase the moon's shadow, to witness 16 total eclipses of the sun. Asteroid 78434 is named Dyer. And Alan's website is AmazingSky.com. And I'll tell you what, every book this man has touched has been amazing. And I have got his ebook on how to photograph solar eclipses. And there are so many ideas and techniques I can't wait to try. So, Alan, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Terry. Thank you for the invitation to speak. It's always a pleasure to speak to the league, and this is, of course, the topic of the year, or at least for the next couple of months, is the solar eclipse. And so that's the topic tonight, and photographing it. So let me just share the screen and get right into the talk. There we are. Hopefully that's coming through. Are we seeing the title slide? Okay, fine.
Yes.
Good. All right. Well, it's photographing the total eclipse coming up. And that's the topic. And I'll talk about seeing the eclipse, but the topic tonight is photographing it, which is what most people want to do. And there's easy ways to do it. And I outline many ways in my ebook, as Terry mentioned. That's available from this website here, and links to get it from Apple or an e-commerce service that I use for a PDF version of it. And it goes into much more detail. But tonight I'm going to focus on a couple of specific techniques. First of all, my CV, Eclipse CV, I can't put all the eclipses up there, but in the last few years, these are highlights. Turkey in 1999, Pitcairn Island in 2005, over Antarctica in 2003, and Libya in 2006, Chile and Altiplano in 1994, and over the Canadian Arctic in 2008. So I've seen it from literally the ends of the earth, Arctic and Antarctic, from air and by sea and by land as well. And all are fabulous and all are unique. And that's one of the great things about eclipses, is the eclipse site where you go to is a big part of the experience. But this year, of course, we have a chance, as we did 7 years ago, and many of you may have been in that lunar shadow, the umbral shadow here on August 21st, touching the coast of Oregon and then on its way across the United States for a cross-continent, but strictly in the U.S. in 2017. You were maybe in that umbral shadow path. And I was in Idaho. It was a day and a half drive south of me, so it was great. I'm in southern Alberta in Canada, and it was a fabulous experience. But of course, as soon as you see an eclipse, you always want to see another one. There's no question, especially for this audience of amateur astronomers. There's no convincing that you want to get to the eclipse path. And in April 8th, it's going to be at the sort of the great North American eclipse, because it crosses Mexico, United States, and for the first time since 1979 in southern Canada. I saw one from up in Arctic Canada in 2008, but first time since 79 for southern Canada. It will cross 6 Canadian provinces as well. And so millions of people live in the path, and millions more can get to it quite easily. But you got to get to the path. I'm sure this audience knows it, but there's just no such thing as 99% totality. Some places are advertising, "Oh, come see the eclipse at our place here. We're 99% of the effect." No, you're not. You're outside that path. You're 1% of the effect. You've got to get inside the path of totality to see the total eclipse and get the total experience. It's the difference is night and day, literally. You don't have to be at the center line of the path, but you need to be in the path at whatever site is going to work out most convenient. But now I'm going to concentrate on photography. And our goal tonight in the talk tonight is to get close-up shots, the kind of technique most amateur astronomers are going to want to do with a telescope or telephoto lens, close-up images, or movies. I'll talk about that. Using methods that are fairly simple, requiring a minimum of attention during totality, so the least can go wrong. Because believe me, if anything can go wrong, it will a few minutes before the total eclipse begins. So how can you get great pictures? Fairly simply. That's the focus tonight. I'll talk about a couple of more complex options. So tonight's options that I'm discussing is a telephoto lens on a tripod for movies and stills, maybe putting on a tracker for tracking the sky. It has its advantages. Or using a telescope on a larger tracking mount of some kind. And so close-ups of the eclipse sun show the corona and the prominences really well, and it's the kind of images most amateur astronomers are going to want to take, these kind of close-ups. So that's what I'm focusing on tonight. The options I'm not discussing tonight, but it's all in my ebook, are the wide angle shots. And I always take a shot like this at every eclipse. Sometimes it's the only kind of shot I take. Wide angle images or movies or time-lapse images, they're fairly easy to do and effective, and I explain those methods so they can be done quite easily and leave you total freedom to look at the eclipse because the camera's running on its own. But tonight I'm talking about the sort of close-up views, and I'll end with a brief overview of processing options as well, once you get a whole set of eclipse shots taken in close-up through a telescope or a telephoto lens. But you gotta get your solar filters. You need it for only the partial phases, not for totality. And I find in testing that the glass or mylar type filters, the silvery kind of mylar, it's actually polyethylene, but it's not anyway, but we call them mylar filters. They're the best for photography in terms of the sharpest, most contrasty types of filters. There's another type called black polymer filters, which are the kind used for the eyeglasses and the handheld types. And they're perfectly fine for that, but they tend to be a little soft and low contrast for photography, especially long focal lengths, close-up views. So the glass or mylar types are the best, and get your filters as soon as possible. If you don't have them now, get them right away, because all the dealers and companies that sell them, they're going to get in short supply, and you may have a tough time getting the size and the type that you want for your. So decide what it is you want to shoot through and get a filter for it. You need it for the partial phases or for focusing during the partial phases. Even if you're not shooting the partial phases, you need to get it all focused. So you need the filters. The mylar types generally give a whiter bluish sun, which is a more natural color, at least white is, but you can tint it later in processing. Whereas the glass filters coated with metal or indeed the sort of polymer filters give you a more yellow sun, which kind of people expect the sun to look like. But get those filters now and practice with them. There's thread-on filters that will go on a lens, thread on front of a lens, just like any other camera filter. You can get them, and they are like ND 100,000. So if you think you're going to use your neutral density filters that you've bought for other photographic purposes, stack a bunch together, no, don't do that. They may not even be safe to aim at the sun. You need a filter made for the purpose. It's ND 100,000, and there are several filter manufacturers for camera filters like Case and Nissi and K&F Concept that have come out with 100,000 ND filters in the last couple of months. Or you can get the filters that sort of clamp on over the front of a lens or a telescope, and those are very common and pretty versatile. Or the kind that I use certainly at the annular eclipse. In fact, this is the one I shot the annular eclipse with last October, is again a mylar, mylar, but it's in kind of an open cell with a little sun finder on the front, and that's very handy because sometimes finding the sun at the last minute can save you, and so it's handy to have that. Get your filter and now test, because the sun is the same brightness now as it will be during the eclipse, and test what exposure, because it does vary from filter to filter. What exposure is going to be best for the partial phases. You don't want to get the image too dim, but you don't want to get it too bright and overexposed and you're not seeing the sunspots or things like that. So figure out what that correct exposure is for your filter and your camera and your telescope now. And test it on partly cloudy days, because you might be shooting through some cloud. And typically those are the kind of exposures you need through a solar filter, but I would always bracket, if you're taking a set of shots of the partial phases throughout the partial phase to make a sequence, and then at the after totality for the last half of the eclipse, take shots at that predetermined best exposure, but bracket as well. And you can set up cameras, I'll talk about that, to automatically take extra exposures at a different exposure setting. You don't need darker ones, but you might need brighter ones. So an exposure taken at the correct exposure, and then +1 and +2 stops, perhaps, because you might be shooting through some thin cloud or haze or something like that, the transparency isn't as good as it was during your test days. And so a bracketed set is good to have in case you are shooting through a bit of cloud of some kind. And then practice removing that filter. But don't do it when your telescope is aimed at the sun now. But practice removing the filter and putting it back, because that can foul people up. Where suddenly the filter gets stuck and you're panicking, you can't get the filter off just as the totality is beginning, and suddenly your plans are out the window. So practice with that is simply getting the filters off and then putting it back, because you don't want to keep a telescope or camera aimed at the unfiltered sun for a long time after totality ends. And then the solar filters must be removed for the diamond rings and of course for totality itself. But if you want to get shots of those diamond rings, which are technically before totality begins and after totality ends, then you need to have the filter off the telescope or telephoto lens for about a minute or two. And it's perfectly safe to have optics aimed at the sun for that couple of minutes or so. For the diamond rings, you have to do it. It's not safe to look through a telescope or binoculars while that diamond ring is happening, not until totality is actually begun officially. But it's safe for optics for a camera or whatever, because if you want to get a diamond ring shot like I show on either side here, you have to do that. Those are just before totality begins for about a minute, and just after totality for about another minute or so. You want to get those diamond rings, what we call the Bailey's beads, the last bits of sunlight disappearing or poking out from through mountain and craters and valleys on the moon. The other thing to test is focusing as well. If you're an experienced lunar and planetary photographer, you're kind of familiar with this, but you got to practice focusing through your filter, whatever optics you're using, because it can be kind of hard, especially in the daytime when it's bright and it's hard to see your screen or whatever. But people fuss and fuss and fuss about what's the best exposure for the total eclipse. There isn't a best exposure, as I'll explain in a sec. But there is the best focus. It's got to be in focus. If you're a little out of focus, that'll ruin all your shots, and it's really hard to fix that later in post-production. And so the focus will not change when you remove the filter. So you can focus with the filter in place, and it's not going to change when you remove the filter, because the filter's over the front of the optics. Deep sky photographers are familiar with the fact that you're putting a filter in between the optics and the sensor, and you're changing filters to take your oxygen and hydrogen alpha or whatever, and the focus keeps shifting. That's not the case here, because the filter is over the front of the optics. That does not shift the focus. What can shift the focus is the temperature changes throughout the morning or the day or the afternoon of the eclipse. The day gets warmer, but it can also get colder as the eclipse proceeds. And so you might focus very precisely at the beginning of the eclipse, think you've got it. By the time you get to totality, an hour and a half later, it's shifted out of focus, especially with a long telephoto lens and telescope. They're the most susceptible to shifting in focus. And so by the time you get to totality, you're just a little out of focus. So a few minutes before totality, refocus, recheck your focus, focus on the little thin cusp of the sun or a sunspot or the edge of the sun, and practice on that as best you can now with the sun, uneclipsed sun now, to get that focus as precisely as possible. Because the poor focus is what ruins most eclipse shots, not poor exposure. The other practice target is the moon. The crescent moon is great, or even the full moon now, but the crescent moon is great because it's got a range of brightness from the very bright crescent to the earth shine on the dark side of the moon. So practice on the ease of removing your filter without jarring the camera and bumping it. Is all your gear solid and easy to aim? And practice setting it up. Does everything connect securely? Can you focus accurately with that camera that you're planning on using on the moon in this particular case? As you're handling the camera and changing settings, as I'll suggest, will that blur the image if you're handling it too quickly and not allowing vibration to dampen down? So practice with that. And then the motion of the sky. If you're not on a tracking mount, how long an exposure can you go before it gets too blurry because the sky is simply moving? And typically it might only be a fraction of a second or half a second or a quarter of a second, but you can practice with that now on the moon. And then you can take a range of exposures and practice shooting through a whole range of exposures from very short to very long, and practice adjusting your camera for that, and then seeing if there's any odd lens flares, because that really bright crescent, if it gets really overexposed, is kind of a stand-in for those diamond rings. You might find that you get kind of some lens flares or ghost images from that if you really overexpose that bright crescent. And then learn to operate your camera by feel. You know, how many clicks does it take to go from one settings to another? And then do it all in a hurry in 4 minutes. You've only got 4 minutes to do this. So practice again and again. You might get it all right, but you've taken 8 minutes to sort out your program, and that's no good. You're going to miss the diamond rings. You're going to miss the opportunity to get the shots that you want. So practicing on the moon is really essential. Now that sounds really complicated and tougher. So here's a simpler method I'm going to suggest that you might want to consider. Again, a close-up view through a lens like this, a long telephoto lens on a tripod. And this is an example. This is video. This is a real-time video, and I'm now removing the filter from the camera. And it's the frame went bright for a moment or two, but then auto exposure kicked in. This is a video recorded in 2017 in 4K video with the state-of-the-art Canon camera at the time. And I just set the exposure on auto exposure and then focused, however, on the moon or on the crescent sun, rather, with a filter in place, focused on it, but then simply took the filter off and just let the exposure be what it may, and just let the camera run. And after removed the filter, I didn't touch it at all. The camera was just running on its own, and it was recording the sound, which I'm not playing here as well, but that's great to record the sound. And this is real-time video now as the diamond ring gets smaller and smaller and smaller here, and eventually turns into the total eclipse. We should be getting in here tight pretty soon. There it is. There it is. There it is. Whoosh, there, now you're in totality. Now it is safe to look at the sun through optics or whatever you might have. But your camera is okay, shooting for that minute or two before totality begins to get the diamond rings. And this is real-time video in this particular case, and I just let it run and let it drift across the frame. So the steps for that are like a 300 to 500 millimeter telephoto lens or a telescope on a fixed tripod in this particular case, to keep it simple. And I'm just letting the sun drift through the frame. I'm not worried about tracking it. And then I'm setting the aperture fairly wide open, if not absolutely wide open, to avoid diffraction spikes coming off those diamond rings. And then low ISO, ISO 100, and aperture priority auto exposure. I'm just starting the movie with the solar filter on and taking it off, and I'm not even adjusting the exposure at that point. The camera compensates quite well, I found. I've shot 2 eclipses like this, and it works really well. And then just remove that filter about a minute before totality, and you can just forget it and leave it until after totality. Just don't forget to put the filter back on or cap the lens or whatever, turn it away. Don't leave it aimed at the sun well after totality. So that works pretty well, and this is the kind of focal lengths you need. 135 is pretty small. 200, 300, as you go to longer focal lengths, you're obviously framing in tighter and tighter. But I find for that kind of movie and also still images, I'll talk about next, 300 to 600 is about the best focal length. You don't need a lot of focal length. And with a 600 millimeter lens on a full frame camera, this is how much the sun will move across the frame over 8 minutes. And this is from Texas, where the sun is almost due south and moving horizontally left to right across the frame. And so it's 4 minutes of totality, a couple of minutes either side. And so if you're taking that kind of shot, you don't want to put the sun dead center at the start of the sequence a couple of minutes before totality, because it'll drift off and maybe be off the frame by the time totality ends. So you want to plan your framing to put it onto one side and let it move across the frame, hopefully so that it's in the center when it's the middle of totality. And so it takes a little bit of planning with planetarium software like I used here, Sky Safari, to plan how you should frame it at what point to start the eclipse. And so it works pretty well. But you need a solid mount and tripod head to make this work, or an alt-azimuth mount, as I show here on the right. Something that's easy to aim precisely, because you will have to, not during the actual totality, you don't need to move the sun or move the telescope rather, but you need to aim it and frame it precisely at the beginning before you're starting your sequence. And if you've got a sloppy, loose ball head or something and it flops around, suddenly you're panicking because you've lost sight of the sun, and it's just hard to find when it's nothing but a black sky with the filtered sun in it. And so having like a geared tripod head where you can very precisely aim and frame, get it exactly the way you want, and it's solid as well, and then just let it drift across the frame. Or the setup on the right here with a little alt-azimuth telescope mount and telescope, and it's just kind of a smooth motion that it makes it still fairly easy to exactly aim the telescope, in this case, where you want. Now for video settings, as I said, aperture priority, auto exposure can work really well. This is an example from a sequence like that in Australia in 2012. With the filter on, took it off, the frame goes bright for a couple of seconds, and then the auto exposure kicks in and gives you a pretty well exposed diamond ring shot. And as that disappears and you go to corona, the exposure opens up a bit and you get a nicely exposed solar corona as well. So the video works pretty well. Now, modern cameras now, mirrorless cameras in particular, have what's called a log profile option for a little more advanced videography, and that can give you better results, a little less contrast and a little more dynamic range. Shooting in what's called log profile, it takes a little more processing and video editing, but it might produce better results. I'll show the difference in the next slide here. That's an option. Mostly for the mirrorless cameras, I think, have that option. But whatever camera you're using, and I'm talking about DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, not dedicated video cameras per se, but they all have movie modes of some kind and shoot in the best quality available. HD, they all have that, but most of them have 4K, and some cameras even have 8K video now. Or the movie crop mode, where it's shooting video from the center of the frame. That can help give you a little more reach. Frame the moon and the sun and the corona in a little bit tighter perhaps. Or there's also high quality modes where it does take a 4K video, but it downsamples it from a larger 6 or 8K sensor. That can give you better image quality. But test on the moon or the filtered sun now to see which of these video modes might be the best for your particular camera. This was some test shots I took just a couple of nights ago on the gibbous moon with a Canon R6 camera I'm planning to use for video. And in the standard profile, contrast profile on the left, and then in the log profile on the right. And it does pick up a little more detail in the bright parts of the moon, and also in the shadow, in the darker parts. So it will pick up more of the corona and not blow out the highlights as much. But they tend to be noisier when you use cameras in these log profile settings. So that's why you test now to see which kind of settings might be best for your particular camera if you're planning to shoot video. There may be some options on your camera, especially if it's a new camera that you haven't played with before, but it's worth playing with to see what might be best for the eclipse. That solar corona is a demanding subject. Now, I threw this in because suddenly, as of this year, this is going to be an option. It's using one of these smart scopes. And I have both of these, and they work great, and they'll aim at the sun. Sometimes you've got to manually aim the sun and find it or whatever. They don't necessarily go to the sun, and so that can be a bit of a panic. But once you're on the sun and you can get the tracking going, they'll keep the sun on frame pretty well. How well will they work through totality? No one knows, right? These have come into the hobby since the last solar eclipse. I think a few people might have used the little dwarf scope on the right there at the eclipse in Australia in 2023. But for the most part, this is unknown territory. We can test it now in the sun and the moon and see, but how well is it going to work? The auto exposure modes, as you take the filters off, same thing. Take the filters off during totality. What's going to happen? Who knows? But they can shoot very nice 4K videos, and that might be an option as well. Perhaps particularly a family member, that you can put in charge of your smart scope and see what you get. But it's unexplored territory because these telescopes are so new. But they should give you some nice results. Now, sometimes amateur astronomers, they've got these H alpha scopes. These are, fabulous. And they say, oh, I'm going to use them for the eclipse. Sure, for the partial phases, they're great because you can see the prominences. You can kind of know what prominences are going to appear as soon as totality begins, but don't use them for totality. You won't see anything through them very much, at least nothing worth looking at, because the prominence you can see naked eye or through binoculars or a telescope without any kind of special filtration. That's the point. So you can have an H alpha scope perhaps at your rig or whatever, just to preview where the prominences are going to be once totality begins, but don't use them for totality itself. Now, the other option is the same kind of rig, but using it to take still images, which is what most people are going to want to do rather than movies to get the still images. And here I'm just talking about on a static tripod, a non-tracking mount. Once again, solid as possible, easy to aim and frame and whatever, as you have to continue to follow the sun to keep it centered, and as you continue to shoot through the partial phases or even through totality. This is where you might need to keep recentering the sun, perhaps, and it needs to be a mount that's as easy to aim precisely as possible. And for a telescope, a little short focus refractor like that is great. In fact, that very rig is what I used in Libya in 2006. And it was a nice compact airline portable and a little 66 millimeter Apple refractor, and you could just push the mount around and aim it precisely to recenter the sun through totality 2 or 3 times. So if you're traveling or if you're flying or whatever, a little rig like that would be excellent on a nice, solid, but easy to move alt-azimuth mount. And people then wonder, okay, what exposure should I use? It's all over the place. No one exposure can record everything that your eye can see. This is where the deficiency in of cameras shows up, is that your eye can see this whole dynamic range from the bright inner corona and the prominences out to the outer streamers or whatever. No one exposure can capture all of it. You need something as short as 1,000th of a second for the prominences or the diamond rings. And as the exposure gets longer and longer, you're simply recording more and more and more of the outer corona. And then even as long as 1 second, talking about typically ISO 100 for all of these shots, and f4.5, f5, 6, something like that, typical of a telescope or telephoto lens. But a low ISO, people think it's going to get dark. I need to shoot at a high ISO. No, this is not the Milky Way. That corona is as bright as the full moon on average. It's bright. You don't need to use a high ISO. Low ISO 100, maximum dynamic range, least noise, and but exposure as long as 1 second is going to now really show those outer streamers and the earth shine. You can see features on the moon there. That's earth shine bouncing off the earth, sunlight bouncing off the earth, lighting up the dark side of the moon. And so a long exposure of like 1 or 2 seconds, it's what's needed to record that earth shine there. Now, if you're not tracking the sun, a long exposure could just blur, and I'll talk about that in a sec. So that's where tracking comes in if you do want to do those long exposures. But for still images of any kind, just tracking on a mount that's tracking or not tracking, shoot raw, always shoot raw, don't just shoot JPEGs. You get the maximum control afterwards in processing with raw. With DSLR cameras, don't use the mirror lockup that just complicates the exposure and slows down the exposure. Just lock the mirror up, put the camera in live view, that locks the mirror up, prevents that vibration, and you can now watch the eclipse on your screen. And don't make the mistake I did in 2017, where you spend too much time looking at that eclipse on the screen and not up at the sky. But with the mirrorless camera, there's an electronic first curtain shutter mode where it starts the exposure electronically. So what little vibration there might be from the shutter itself opening, you avoid that. And so those are settings for mirrorless and DSLR cameras, both types. To make it easier to shoot a whole range of exposures, you can always set up what's called auto exposure bracketing, where it automatically steps through a range of 5, 7, or 9, depends on the camera, exposures automatically, sort of 2/3 to 1 stop apart. And this is what you can preset ahead of time and assign to what's called a custom shooting mode. So you switch to that C1 or C2 in the case of a Canon, or a U1 or U2, depends on the camera. But you preset all that and just quickly click to that custom user mode, and all that bracketing and settings, and it takes 4 or 5 different settings to get it all right, and what that initial exposure is as well, and you can get all that preset. And then if you have the self timer on 2 seconds, you can press the shutter button once with a remote release, not on the camera itself, remote release, and then it fires the shots automatically in quick succession, faster than you could ever do one by one, and with less vibration. So you can get a whole set of exposures very quickly using auto exposure bracketing. So it's a little more work, but you can automate it to some extent. And then, as I said, with the self timer on, at least with Canon, I think with most cameras, you just press the shutter button once and it automatically goes click, 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 and just gradually it changes the shutter speed. You're changing the shutter speed from, quite short to much longer, as we saw, to record the full range of brightness of the corona. Now that's during totality itself. For the diamond rings, you don't really want a whole range of exposures. One exposure, and typically very short, 1/1000th of a second or something like that, is all you need, but taken in rapid succession to capture the diamond ring gradually disappearing, and the last little Bailey's beads, and then the prominences appearing, and then the opposite at the end of totality as well. So a way to do that is to put the camera in continuous shooting mode. So once you press and hold the shutter down, it's automatically firing a whole bunch of shots as fast as it can, with high speed or not so high speed continuous mode. But even in a slower speed, you can getting 5 frames a second, something like that, which is more than enough to get a nice sequence of shots of the diamond rings to turn into a little time lapse, or just to pick the best ones as well. And then be ready to do that again at third contact when the eclipse ends. And that's a mode you can assign to another custom shooting mode to quickly go from that before totality to the other bracketing mode during totality, and then switch back to continuous mode for the diamond rings. That's if you want to get that full suite of shots through the whole range at totality. And as I say, that can be a little harder, even automating it as best you can, because it requires attention to the camera. You can't just get things running and walk away and just look. You're having to pay a little attention to the camera. But once you get an auto exposure bracketed sequence of shots from short to very long, that's it, leave it, and then quickly set back the camera to be ready for the third contact diamond ring. The mistake you make is you keep shooting and shooting and shooting, and you're not ready to shoot the diamond ring when third contact it appears. You don't have your camera set right. So take those shots, get them in the bag, get your shots, and then just look, and take the last part of totality to just look, and then have your camera ready to get third contact when that diamond ring. And you'll see it through the eyepiece if you're using a rig like I'm going to show you in a moment. You'll see suddenly the chromosphere starting to light up on the edge of the sun, and that signals that you've got, totality about to end. Another option is using a star tracker of some kind, like a tracking mount of some kind. But a small star tracker like this is nice and portable if you're having to fly or whatever. The disadvantages of using these is that they can be shaky because you're operating the camera to some extent and they can bounce around. If you've got a ball head on it, you're trying to aim and frame the sun accurately, as I said, that can be hard to do. Suddenly something slips, something comes loose, and you're panicking at the last minute. And they're going to need to be at least roughly polar aligned. Now, you can't do that during the day, but you can set them at the right latitude and then aim them as due north as you can, as closely as you can. Because you just need to keep the sun kind of centered and tracking for a few minutes, basically, with a tracker. The advantage of doing that, going to that effort, is that it allows those longer exposures in order to pick up the Earth shine or the outer corona without the motion of the sky blurring the image. Otherwise, your maximum exposures may be a quarter of a second, perhaps. Depends on the focal length of the lens. And it keeps the sun centered, or at least close to centered, to make it easier to later stack them for exposure blending. And some sort of tracking is kind of essential if you are planning to shoot with quite long focal lengths as well. And you could shoot video that way as well if you wanted to, in order to keep the sun centered and not drifted off. But it's not really that essential. The other option is to, notch it up a little bit more, and amateur astronomers, we probably got a lot of this gear, is a proper equatorial mount of some kind, and an apochromatic refractor is what I like to use, but again, don't have to have a great long focal length telescope. And so now you're a little more serious, and if you're driving the Eclipse, well, you can take as much gear as you want in this particular case. However, you may be familiar with this gear, but I would still practice with it now on the sun and the moon and operating the camera and making sure you're not introducing vibration. But practice with the mount set to the latitude you're going to be at. If you're driving to the eclipse from, northeastern U.S. or something, and you're going down to Texas or Mexico, or practice with it set to that latitude, because you might find that somehow with it angled at that lower latitude and aimed due south, which is where the sun's going to be from Mexico or Texas at mid-totality, something isn't working right. Something is colliding. Something isn't hitting, which worked fine at home, but it's not going to go from a Mexican latitude, perhaps. So practice with it set to the latitude and where the sun's going to be at totality. These two mounts stop tracking as soon as they hit the meridian, or in the case of the GTI mount on the left, about 15 degrees past the meridian. And you don't want to find that and be surprised about that during the eclipse or just before totality, that your mount stops tracking. So check that your mount will in fact continue to track through the meridian if that's where the sun's going to be at totality, and it might well be. And people often think they're just going to go huge with it. Think the biggest telescope, the biggest is the best, and it's going to be the best pictures. No, don't. I would say no. Don't go with a big, long focal length Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. They're going to crop the corona, and the corona is the star of the show, and it's going to extend out all around the sun, pretty symmetrical at this solar maximum eclipse, and so extend several degrees either side. So you don't want to crop in too close. You could go with an alt-azimuth mount like this for tracking the sun. It'll work. But not if you're intending to do a time-lapse sequence, to photograph the whole sequence of the eclipse from start to end, because with an alt-azimuth mount like this, the field's going to rotate, and the moon, once you put the time-lapse together, will appear to move in a curved path across the sun. So don't use an alt-azimuth mount like this, a go-to mount, if you're planning on taking a whole sequence throughout the whole eclipse in order to turn it into a time-lapse sequence. Use a proper German equatorial mount, polar aligned, that will keep north up and have the moon move in a linear path across the disk of the sun if you're planning on that kind of sequence. Or you can go long if you really want. I mean, if that's what you're after, you want to get in close to the prominences and the inner corona detail, that's fine. Go for it if you like. That's what I did on my first eclipse in 1979 in southern Manitoba. There I am there on the right. There's my Quest Star 3.5 on the Linhof tripod on Kodachrome film. And it got the prominences really well. So if you want to get in close, fine. Shoot with a longer focal length. But you're kind of sacrificing the beauty of the outer corona. And the kind of rig I like to use is this dual scope rig. I used it in 2017 and in last year, 2023, for the annular eclipse, a scope to look through, or a scope to shoot through, the 4-inch refractor, and then a piggyback smaller scope just to look through. Just so, and then you can look at the camera and see what it's doing, but also have the eyepiece only inches away from your eye to look at the same time as well. So that kind of dual scope rig works really well. That's sort of what I used last year at the annular eclipse. And there I am with an almost similar rig in 1998 in Curacao, which was 19 years after the first eclipse I saw in 1979. Same telescope, the Astrophysics 4-inch refractor, used in Curacao in 98, in Australia in 2012, in 2017, and then last year in Utah in 2023, the 4-inch astrophysics refractor. And then a little piggyback refractor on top of it, just to look through. It's a great way to shoot and look at the same time, if you remember to look. That's the thing. And so practice with it now, however, to make sure it's all solid and it's balanced. It'll work. It'll track well, especially again through the meridian. And that was the setup I used last year in Utah for the 2023 annular with that, veteran now astrophysics 4-inch refractor. Now, people ask about this. Can camera control apps? The deep sky photographers are familiar with these kinds of apps that control their cameras for deep sky photography. Don't use them. They're not designed for eclipses. I would not recommend using these apps to control your camera. They can't fire the shutter fast enough or in quick sequence to allow you to get Bailey's beads and diamond rings. They're going to be too sluggish and can only take shots every few seconds or so. And they have to be started at exactly the right time. Otherwise, the whole sequence is for naught. It's not going to take the right shots at the right time. I was just playing with this morning because someone asked me about this yesterday. I thought, okay, let me try this. And now, ASIR, fabulous little product, and it's great for deep sky, not for eclipses. You could only take a shot every 5 or 6 seconds because it got to download the image every few seconds. It's too slow. It's not going to work for an eclipse. Even if you program a little sequence of shots here, it's not going to work. It's not going to do what you want as quickly as you want. So don't use this kind of deep sky stuff. There are eclipse control apps specifically for controlling cameras during an eclipse, where if they enter the latitude and longitude precisely from where you are, they know exactly when all the events are going to occur, and they fire the shutter at exactly the right time in a scripted sequence that you can set up and control a camera through a USB port for a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. Eclipse Orchestrator on the right there by Fred Brunges works for Windows, but only select Nikon and Canon cameras. It hasn't been updated for a few years, and this last week a talk that Fred gave said it should work for mirrorless cameras, but he's not sure. So you get the free copy and you try it. And for Mac, there's a program called Eclipse Maestro. Xavier was also speaking last week at a talk I zoomed in on, and he hasn't updated that in several years. And it only works on the older Mac OS, not the most recent. And he doesn't have the time to update it. It's so involved in keeping the software up to date as Windows and Apple changes their operating systems. So it might work if you got an older Mac. It's a very capable program, but you got to try it and see if it'll even run. It doesn't run on this computer that I'm using now. So get them and test and then see, because the goal of this is that you just press go and it does everything for you. And you just sit back and you watch the eclipse, and the laptop is controlling the camera, in theory. For Macs, there's a new program by Rob Hawley called Capture Eclipse. It's only for Macs. It does run on the latest Mac, even the M1 and Silicon chip Macs, and it's only for Canon cameras, however. So Nikon, Sony, you're out of luck. But it does work. I've tested it. It does work. And so it's a possibility. You know, we astrophotographers, we like to throw as much technology at photography as possible. It in theory could work and automate your whole sequence perhaps and get all the diamond rings you need and all the totality shots you need. And then the diamond rings all automatically while you just sit back and relax and watch. In theory. This is what you might be faced with, right? Windows not responding. Oh no, reboot your computer. Yeah, right. 30 seconds before totality. Yeah. So I've never used those apps. I don't trust that they're going to work. An app that I do suggest, however, by Gordon Tullipon, and I had it running in 2017, and I'll have it on a phone or a tablet. It's just a timer app. It doesn't control anything, but it just gives you audio alerts, how many seconds to go before totality. And audio alerts of what to look for. Look for shadow bands. Look for the horizon colors. Reminders that you need as to what to look for. And then reminders of when things are happening. So you know it's 20 seconds until third contact. And so you know to be ready because every eclipse starts and ends sooner than you expect. So it's a great app to have on running with your audio prompts to help you in your timing and planning. So the last little section here to end off tonight is just, I'm not going to go into a detailed processing tutorial. That would take a couple of hours, but just processing the eclipse image, particularly close-up images here. If you shoot in RAW, even with a single image, you can recover a lot of detail in the highlights and shadows and really bring out detail as long as you shot RAW. And there's all kinds of adjustments with RAW processors. I'm showing camera RAW. Lightroom's the same thing to really help bring out detail as much as possible in a single close-up image during the totality. But blending multiple exposures is kind of what people want to do because that's why you take lots and lots of different exposures from short to long to stack them and blend them together. And there's kind of 4 methods I'll talk about where you could blend them in camera RAW using its HDR function, using specialized HDR software, using what's called luminosity masks in Photoshop, and then finally using stack modes in Photoshop. So say you've got a whole set of exposures, 10 exposures here, very short, top left, very long, bottom right there. And you process them in camera raw to each look as good as possible. Then you can use its own built-in merge to HDR function to produce, and that's the result, and it looks pretty good. Yeah, and it's done a nice job blending them together. And then you can further process that resulting blended image quite nicely. Except when you look close up, this is what you might see. All kinds of little edge artifacts there. Because even if you're on a tracking mount and you're tracking the sun and it's keeping centered, the moon is moving separate from the sun. And so any kind of images you take to stack later should be taken as quickly as possible. Bang, 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 as quickly as possible, as preventing vibration will allow. That's why you don't want to have 5 or 6 seconds between shots, as this other software, that I don't recommend using, is going to do. So you ought to take those shots as quickly as possible. And so, because what are you aligning on? The moon or the prominences? The moon is moving separate from the background sun. And sometimes blending in a separate exposure just for the moon or just for the prominences is necessary to kind of get a final proper shot. And so that alignment can really be tricky. But HDR software, there's several programs. This is one from Nick Collection, HDR Effects, and it did a nice job as well, throwing those same shots at it, but all aligned, because HDR software has auto-align routines. They won't work on these shots. I've tried it. They don't work. You got to manually align them and then throw those images at it. HDR software, it does. It does a pretty nice job. This is Photomatics, dedicated HDR software. It also did a very nice job as well. But you've got to manually align images that you're sending to HDR software. And then another method is using luminosity masks in Photoshop. On the right there, you brought in a whole set of exposures from short to very long in a stack, and then put what's called luminosity masks on each of the exposures. In this case, I created the masks with a one click using a special luminosity mask extension panel called Lumenzia. And each mask only reveals the brightest part of each of that image, but they all kind of blend together to give you an overall composite that shows you the whole range of brightness. And so that's one method. The last method is using what's called a smart object. You take the same set of 10 exposures in this particular case, load them into Photoshop as separate layers without masks on it, select all the images and turn them into what's called a smart object. And then you apply what's called a stack mode, in this case, a mean stack mode. So it's averaging the content of those images together with a mean mathematical averaging mode. And once again, it gives you a quite nice blend of the best of all those exposures. That's another way of blending a whole set of exposures, which is why you take all that range of exposures. So those are 4 methods for producing the blended exposures. And then you apply other types of sharpening and contrast adjustments, or even layer in an individual shot for the prominences or an individual shot for the earth shine in that particular case as well. So you can go to town, or as you've got a whole full suite of images like this of the totality, the diamond rings either side of totality, the crescent partial phases either side of that, and then you can bring those in as layers into Photoshop, layer by layer, and move them around and line them up and make a composite like this to kind of show you the whole sequence of events that no one shot can do. So you need a whole series of them blended together to give you this kind of time sequence. That can be really much harder in Photoshop to do, but you got to have the original shots to begin with to allow you to do that kind of more complex composite. But that's kind of more the higher end here. And if all that works, great. But if it doesn't and something goes wrong, don't panic, don't fuss. Just forget the photography and just look. Because the worst thing is coming away from an eclipse, not with pictures you didn't get because something worked, but coming away not having seen the eclipse. So if something doesn't work, just look and have binoculars handy, or a telescope or whatever, and just look and enjoy the eclipse, and don't worry about the technology. You don't want to be fighting computers and things like that when you should be looking up at what is possibly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So there's lots and lots and lots more information in my ebook, and in fact, a huge chapter just on processing. Core of the book is just on processing, all different types of images as well, and lots more information about all the other methods, which I didn't get into tonight. So that's my website, as Terry mentioned. Please visit and check it out. Good luck to all of us on April 8th, wherever you may be, and clear skies to all of us on Eclipse Day. And I hope we all get the shots and the experience we're all hoping to on April 8th, 2024. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. That was really interesting. A lot of good information. So, Scott, I'm going to go to you if there's any questions.
There are. Let me scroll back a bit here. We have David Warner, and he is wanting to know, he's watching on Facebook, he's wanting to know, I'm hoping that the approaching solar maximum that we'll have a good corona, question mark. What do you think?
Oh, yes. I mentioned that briefly. At a solar maximum eclipse, what you get, well, kind of like the eclipse here in the background, this was 2005, so I don't know if that was maximum or not. But at a solar max, what you get is a corona that's symmetrical all around the sun. And so even north and south of the sun. Whereas at a solar minimum eclipse, what you get is the corona stretching out in the ecliptic, along the ecliptic either side. I mean, that's a beautiful looking corona as well, and then not as much north and south. But at solar max, you get a very symmetrical eclipse of corona all around the sun. That's why you don't want to frame in too tight and crop off a good chunk of the corona. And it's at the solar poles where you get those polar brushes and those beautiful kind of expanding brushes away from the sun at the north and south poles. So it'll be a pretty round and large corona. How much corona you see will depend on how clear your sky is. Here in 2005, it was, we just squeaked seeing it as it came out from behind the cloud there. So if you got haze and stuff in the sky, you don't see as much corona, but you'll still see corona, and particularly the bright inner part, even through some haze and light cloud. So it's going to be and we hope huge prominences. Well, that would be great. Just big arching prominences would be fabulous at this eclipse.
Right. Another question, maybe some clarification. You got into talking about the kind of cameras that you should use. Do you recommend DSLR, mirrorless type cameras over
either one will
cameras?
be fine. Either one will be fine. I mean, I shot all the 2017 shots. In fact, the last eclipse I was at was 2017, all with DSLRs. Canon, no, I didn't have the Sony at the time. Canon and Nikon DSLRs worked great. This one was, 2005, my 20DA, I guess it was at the time. But now I would be shooting nothing but mirrorless cameras, Canon mirrorless cameras. I've got 4 of them. And I'm trying to think, would I put I've got a couple sitting over there on the shelf, a couple old DSLRs, would I put them to use? Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe.
But either one will work just fine. The mirrorless cameras have the advantage of more movie modes and movie capabilities. A lot of DSLRs, maybe it's just HD video, perhaps if they're a few years old. And so the mirrorless, there's not a big advantage to mirrorless in terms of image quality. I don't think for this kind of photography, other than in the video aspect, I guess. So use what you've got. Don't buy a brand new camera 2 weeks before the eclipse just for the eclipse. That's asking for trouble. As great a camera as it might be, you're not familiar with it, you'll mess something up.
Right. What about the astro cameras like ZWO, QHY, these pure, dedicated astro cameras? What do you think
that's what someone was asking me about yesterday, and I said there's no reason the cameras themselves might not be perfectly great in terms of image quality. It's the control software used to run them that is just not made for the purpose.
They're not
You
fast
cannot
enough.
fire the shutter quickly enough unless there's modes that I'm not familiar with, and someone expert on those programs might, you just adjust this, whatever. But you gotta, for the diamond rings, you gotta fire 0.02 of a second exposure, bam, 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 like that. I don't think those cameras can do that, or the software can't do that to run them. And so that's the deficiency. They're not made for that purpose. That control software is not made for the purpose. And the software that is, like Orchestrator or Eclipse Maestro or Capture Eclipse, is only made for DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. If they haven't been updated, they may not even work with the newer models of cameras, or in the case of Capture Eclipse, only Canons, because Rob Hawley's only been able to get at the Canon SDK to allow him to write the code to control that brand of camera, and the other cameras are just harder to control. So no, I know, and I just updated the book today, and I put a page in the ebook today and updated it, answering that question. I said the cameras are probably fine, but the noise benefit of cooling the camera not going to make a bit of difference for exposures that are no longer than 2 seconds. So it's the control software that's deficient for this kind of photography. And the deep sky photographers will learn the hard way at the eclipse where something isn't working right.
Right.
Nah, just use your DSLR. Even if it's an older DSLR, it'll be better.
So buy the ebook, okay? Get practice as much as you can before you go, so it's muscle memory, So
Yeah, practice is the big theme in the book. I've got several sections and pages on that, all kinds of things. And also checklists in terms of everything that you need to check to make sure it's working right. Because trust me, it's what will go wrong can, what can go wrong will, and
Well,
in Eclipse, so having backups and, redundancy or whatever.
right. Steve Ziegler is asking on Facebook, have you tried sharp cap or fire capture with the planetary camera?
I haven't. I don't even do planetary photography at all, and I know there's, that's a possibility. It might, because obviously those are designed to take, rapid fire, well, videos.
Video.
I
Yeah.
presume, and that could be fine,
Yeah,
but they're
even if
very
the video
tiny
is like
sensors.
1/60th of a second, that's not going to be fast enough for you.
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you can try it now on the sun and the moon and see what you get, but
Yeah.
once again, they're designed to shoot the planet, and the planet is one set brightness.
Hmm.
And in Eclipse, that object is changing brightness by dozens of f-stops in a few seconds.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to track. You certainly, if you want to stream the eclipse out to a feed or something like that, that might be the great kind of technology to use. But for actually capturing the eclipse, I don't really think so. They work great for the planets, or the lunar close-ups, and they could be good for prominences, real close-ups on prominence, if that's what you want to specialize in. That might work fine. But those planetary cameras are very tiny sensors and high resolution, but small sensors. So you put them on any kind of focal length. I mean, they're made to shoot tiny, tiny objects, the planets, and you're shooting something that's 5 or 6 degrees across.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of great comments about your talk, and so if you are going to the eclipse, you should probably watch this video again a few times. So yeah, because
Definitely.
he spilled it all here. So that's great.
Yeah, and I think the fact of having a list, I mean, let's be honest, we've all been imager, a lot of us are imagers, and you get somewhere and you have forgotten something. I have done that. And it is so frustrating because you have forgotten this one little part that totally almost keeps you from doing that plan that you had done. I
Yes,
mean, it
exactly right.
happens.
And that can happen at any photography, trip,
Exactly.
excursion. But in eclipses particularly, I went to Utah, and unpacking eclipse morning for the annular eclipse, realized I've forgotten the cable. I need to go from the
No.
electronics box of the mount to the motors on the mount. I
Yeah.
had the $6,000 mount. I was using it as a tripod. It could not track the sun. Luckily, this is not a total eclipse, so all the exposures are short, and I had to keep pushing the mount around, keep centering the sun.
Hmm.
Dumb. And as soon as I got home, I went downstairs. There was the cable. I had it on my checklist, but I didn't actually use the checklist to say packet checked off, packet checked off, right?
Yeah,
And so
Yeah,
practice
use the
setting up your
checklist.
gear in your driveway or backyard or whatever, putting it all together. Yeah, I got everything. Yeah, it's working. Now
Hmm.
put it in the car.
Hmm.
So you got it.
yeah. That's going to be the
Alan,
plan because I've done this before too, and you don't want to miss this. I mean, this will be the last big one in the US till what, 2045, I think. Something
2044, it goes right
44.
over my home right here in southern Alberta and then down into Montana. It's right at sunset.
Oh,
It's
wow.
an odd eclipse. It comes down from the north over the Arctic and comes down. So that's technically in the US. There's one in 2033, I think it is, in northern Alaska, like way up in northern Alaska. So, but it's the US.
Yeah,
But 2045 is the next big one
the
in the
big one.
US in terms of right across the US, I think, as like 2017 or like this one.
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, I can see a lot of people that have never seen this eclipse before or never seen an eclipse that realize that this might be their last eclipse. I can see them packing up the family and just driving or
oh
going to
yeah.
the center line. I can see where in 2017 in Casper, we saw a lot of traffic. A lot of, we had friends that drove from Casper to Denver that got stranded basically on the highway for hours trying to get to
Yeah.
Denver. And I could see that happening, I mean, that's always a possibility, something to
Yeah.
prepare for, just in
Yeah,
case it does.
I didn't speak about the
Don't leave right
logistics at
after
all,
midnight.
but yeah, you want to, pick a site and that you can get to, rule is don't sleep outside the path the night before the eclipse. So at least if there's a complete standstill, you can still get out and watch the eclipse from where you are if you can't drive to your site for some reason, or
Right.
plan on certainly staying at your site because it'll be a traffic jam like the biggest football game traffic jam afterwards, trying to get back to where you were staying or whatever.
Yeah.
And so all those logistics, that was the case in 2017 to some extent. It'll be more because there's just more big cities in the
Oh, yeah.
path here. And
Yeah.
but I have found at a lot of eclipses that the predictions of massive traffic jams. Now we did get them in 2017 to some extent, as you say, Terry, but haven't proven quite as immense as, because most people kind of get to a spot and they stay there or whatever, or they're happy to be where they are, or they mistakenly think, oh, I'm at 99% total, I'm good. Okay, fine,
Yeah.
stay where you are.
Yeah.
See,
That's true.
whatever.
Yes. Yep.
But
Well, go early and stay late
yeah,
would be,
yeah,
that's what I
Yeah.
plan on doing too.
Alan, what a fabulous talk. I learned a ton from your presentation. Something
thank
new
you,
every
Carroll.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
it's one of the most demanding types of astronomical events or objects to shoot. It can be as easy as setting up a camera and let it run in time lapse, and I didn't even get into that tonight. I talked about the close-ups. So it can be quite easy, like for this kind of shot I got in the background, where you just set up the camera, let it run, you walk away, and that's it. That's your photography. And it can be easy, but if you want to go for those close-ups and take lots of exposures, then that becomes more challenging because of the pressure of time. That's the thing. It's just you're under this pressure and
Right.
and pressure to look and see and take it all in. And after the eclipse is over, you realize you missed half of it. It's
Yeah.
always
Even
the
the
case.
four, even the 4+ minutes we're going to have on this one, it's going to go
Yep.
so rapidly.
Yep.
Well,
Once twice as
yeah.
much long as what we had in 2017, but still.
Yes. 4 minutes is really generous, but it'll go by. Every eclipse lasts 30 seconds. Right. But that's when you
Yeah.
say, and even the diehards who say, oh, well, you're dragging me to this eclipse. What am I gonna do? It's just gonna get dark. It gets dark every night. No, not like this. Even the diehards say, wow, that
Yeah.
was
Oh, yeah.
great. Where's the next one? Can we go? And
Yeah.
I just put my deposit down on August, whatever it is, 12th, 2026 in Spain.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
the next
That
one
sounds
after.
I think it
great.
goes over Spain and Mallorca or something like that.
Yes.
So,
Yes, it's
right.
sunset at Mallorca. It's low in the west from Spain, and the group I'm with, well, if I go through with the trip, we'll be seeing it from the ramparts of a Spanish castle north of Madrid.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That'd be really cool.
Nice. Yeah.
There is,
and
there
so
is
its
one last,
locations are fabulous. And then
is-
in 2027, the lucky few who pay the price will see it straight overhead from within the Temple of Karnak at Luxor.
Oh my gosh.
Cool.
Wow.
How much is that going to cost?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a
Maybe
7-minute eclipse.
$100 or more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a 7-minute eclipse. It's the longest
Wow.
one of the 21st
It's
century.
going to be
or something. I don't
insane.
know.
That's great.
Yeah.
There is one last camera question, and from Alan Goldberg watching on Facebook. He says, "Can you use a full spectrum modded camera, and will it show prominences better?"
No, what Alan's talking about is the modified DSLRs or whatever that are
Yeah.
modified to record more H alpha light, or in the
Okay.
case of a full spectrum one, as Alan's talking about, it's modified to also record infrared light for people who like to do infrared photography, and landscape photography, whatever. And then you put in other filters to block the infrared if you don't want that. Those will work fine. You don't need them for the prominences. Believe me, those prominences are brilliant. And they're not red, they're pink, because there's a lot of H beta in that light. And so they're not the deep red you expect them to be from looking at them through with H alpha scopes. They're actually flaming pink, and every camera will pick them up. So I've shot eclipses with modified cameras, and because that's what I had. I've never noticed any big difference with them. There's no harm in using them, but I don't think there's any great benefit in using them. One of the modified cameras I have, the Canon RA, which was modified by Canon, the filter they put into it is prone to some reflections, kind of red reflections from the infrared light that it's not blocking as well as it should. And I just in the last few nights was experimenting with putting a UV IR cut filter in front of the sensor, and that helps block those reflections, those kind of red odd reflections. And so I may use that, and that's a case where I don't want the infrared light, because that could just cause reflections and ghost images, things like that. So you're putting a filter in to block the very thing that the camera is trying to record.
Let me ask one final question. Oh, Alan, go ahead if you had something else you wanted to say.
No.
Okay. Will we be able to see the moon's shadow coming on this eclipse or leaving?
Yes, maybe. It depends. If the sun will be quite high from some locations. The lower the sun is, I think the more that shadow arrival and departure is obvious. But with a quite high sun, especially at the very clear sky, it's not going to be as obvious. You will see it dark to the west or southwest, wherever the shadow is coming from, wherever you are. You will see it be darker in that direction. Will you see a definite edge to the shadow come across and then depart? Depends on where your location is. And it's actually easier to see if you got clouds like this, which you don't really want, but it does make the shadow visibility. You just see the clouds change color and shading very rapidly.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's cool.
And
that would
suddenly,
be.
the clouds are very dark in that one direction. All of a sudden, whoosh, they're all dark, and then they lighten up again, and you see it race off in the other direction.
Oh,
But
wow.
the cameras might pick it up, and that's why I always like to shoot a wide-angle time lapse, because the camera will pick up the change of color, sky color, and the shadow whooshing in and whooshing out more. Visually, will you see it? I'm not sure. It's not always obvious. And it depends a lot on the clarity of the atmosphere as well. The clearer the air, the less you're likely to see it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's some ideas I can try. All right.
That's great.
Anything else anywhere before we close this down?
I have one last question here. Alan, you've been to so many eclipses, and I'm sure that you're quite expert in picking the right place to go, but have you ever had to use the plan B where you pick up everything and move, because of clouds?
Almost, not the majority of eclipses, but a lot of eclipses. Yes. And again, it's a logistics thing I didn't get into.
How does Alan Dyer plan for plan B?
Yeah, even on a ship like this, we were moving to get into that clear hole. So we were not, where we exactly planned to be. We were moving. And so often you were having to move. In Australia in 2012, we were going to watch it from our beachside luxury house.
Yeah.
No, every morning it was cloudy. So we scouted out a location inland, less cloud, spent overnight at that location, got up in the morning, there's cloud. We see it's clear out there in the valley. We headed that way as the eclipse was underway. And so you're often having to move at the last minute, last hour, or the day before, watch the weather stats, and move if you can, if you have to move, but if you can, move. And be ready for setting up with only minutes to spare, perhaps. What are you going to set up? Binoculars, certainly. But maybe just a wide-angle time lapse, or something just very easy to set up. You don't have time to set up the whole rig, whatever. And so think about a contingency rig. What would you set up if you had only a few minutes? Which might be the case, and that's true of many, many eclipse chasers, where they're having to chase to a clear hole that they can see, perhaps even. Can they get to it?
Yeah.
All right. So much interesting information. Thank you so much. We appreciate your knowledge. And
you.
I think with that, one thing, we will be back on February 16th with another AL Live. And you'll get more information about that on the Global Star Party. And I would like to thank Alan and John and David and Carroll and everybody here for speaking. And thank you all for joining us. And Scott, how about if you maybe say something about the Global Star Party in case there's people here that have not heard of the Global Star Party, and I'll
Sure.
let you close it up.
All right. Well, the Global Star Party is a program that we try to run every week. It's typically held on Tuesday nights at 6 o'clock. We're now in I think our 4th year of Global Star Parties. And it started out, the idea was, this happened during the lockdown of the pandemic, and I kept getting phone calls here at my office at Explore Scientific saying, I'm so depressed. I can't go to a star party. I can't be with my friends, and what can I do? And, so I'm recommending that they get in their backyards or try to do something. But basically, people were told not to go outside. All of us got to experience what it's like to be under lockdown during that time. There are other people, though, that are in lockdown all the time, okay? There are people that are taking care of their parents, their elderly parents. There are people that are somehow challenged where they can't leave, whether that's a physical challenge, a work challenge, or whatever, okay? There are some people who just can't make it to other physical star parties, and so the Global Star Party still serves a global audience to connect them. But I think one of the really great things is that we have people that have made friends, okay, that never would have made friends with other people around the world, by being able to come on to Global Star Party either as a participant giving a presentation or part of the audience, which is the other great half of Global Star Party. So we simulcast on social media channels like we are right now on the Astronomical League Live. And so the next Global Star Party will be next Tuesday, our 141st Global Star Party. And we always have great speakers on. It is kind of a variety show. We pick a theme, but to challenge our presenters, but they all come in with something a little bit different. We have had people perform live music. We have had people show live views through their telescopes. We have seen live demonstrations of image processing, all of that, but it is all live. And some of my friends that are out there who are stargazing in their backyard will turn on Global Star Party on an iPad or something and just play it in the background, just to kind of get that feeling that they are at a real, physical star party as well. So it's really interesting in that regard. We have had over in aggregate, we've had millions of people watch it, and it's always a pleasure and a real honor to be there with a lot of the people that show up, including the Astronomical League that's always there. David Levy's always there. So it's a lot of fun, and it's wonderful to have the support of the Astronomical League in doing this. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott. All right.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. And Scott, I will let you close it down.
Okay, we'll button it up. So here we go. Thanks, everyone. And as my friend Jack Horkheimer always used to say, keep looking up.